Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme, starting with the letter F. Things like focus, fear, fanaticism, and flying.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives, and we'll look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today we're going to talk about flirting, one of my favorite topics. How to do it, how to tell when you're being flirted with, and what it really means.
It's a juicy one. So, Joanne, tell me, do you consider yourself a flirt?
1,000%. I am a total flirt, and I flirt with all kinds of people. Babies, children, teenagers, and then there's like all those people in between, and then people my age, and then people older, and yeah. And the more unlikely the person, the safer I feel in flirting.
Yeah, definitely. I know exactly what you mean. I think of myself as kind of a flirt, but I think that's because for a long time I really thought of flirting as, having to do with like a desire for romance. And now it seems it's like the older I get, the more I sort of think of flirting as just sort of playing conversationally with someone.
Yes, I think when you're single and sort of in the market for a relationship, you can't help but think of flirting as a means to an end.
Yes.
And I've been married for over 40 years, so it's been a really long time since I've thought of flirting as something other than a delicious, playful, life-enhancing connection with people. And I don't think about the sexual part at all.
So, I have always thought of myself as friendly, just someone who's friendly. But I have a confession, which is that when I was in the 8th grade, at the end of the school year, they had the superlatives in the yearbook. You remember that? It's like most likely to succeed, most likely to blah, 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 blah. So 8th grade.
We had it in high school, but not in 8th grade.
Oh, we had it in high school too. In middle school, I was 13, and I was voted biggest flirt in my class.
Okay, this is something that one might have to go into therapy to get over, right? This is... how did you handle that?
I remember thinking, I think at first, I think that on the surface, I was kind of excited because it was like, it was attention. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, really? I'm the biggest flirt of the entire Santa Rosa Junior High 8th grade class. Nobody's a bigger flirt than Gabby Moskowitz, really? But, I think it was that I was, I was outgoing, which is something that I sometimes feel outgoing. Sometimes I feel like an introvert who is very good at masking. But I was the biggest flirt. And it was because I liked to talk to people. And I had figured out, I do remember that year was the year I figured out that I could talk to boys and it didn't have to mean anything. And it didn't, it could just be fun. And sometimes I think because not everybody was comfortable talking to boys yet, it was almost like I just sort of had the market cornered. And that's always been my trajectory with flirting. But I do think that it kind of got me in trouble sometimes when I started to get older, because sometimes people would perceive my openness and my friendliness as an invitation when it definitely wasn't. Have you ever had that happen before?
Interesting. Maybe, but it was so long ago, I don't even remember it. Mostly what I think is that people are uncomfortable flirting because they don't know how to do it, maybe. And I just think it's a great thing. And I think if people misinterpret it, then it's your job to set them straight and just let them know that, nope, that's not what's going on here. I just want to get to know you. And
Yeah, exactly. Or
so
maybe
now,
I
of
just
course,
want to.
12 memories are popping into my head of times when I flirted and it was misinterpreted. I'm thinking of one where, I used to be a radio talk show host, and I was in my 20s, and I interviewed an author, the author of Ecotopia, Ernest Callenbach. He was known as Chick Callenbach. Anyway, I had just thought he was the greatest, and then I got to interview him, and he was charming and, very intellectual and an academic sort of patches on his elbow, corduroy jacket sort of way, which sounds awful now, but at the time was kind of cool.
Oh no, I
And
love it.
right, and he asked me to go out for a drink afterwards, and I thought this was the coolest thing in the world. And we went out for a drink, and he had something very different in mind, and I was like, I thought, am I the stupidest person in the world? Have I been flirting all evening? I don't know. I thought that I was just being professional and getting to know him and all that, but it's a great story, and I tell it on a podcast that I'm going to be releasing soon, very soon,
Mm.
called In This Story. So
Mm.
stay tuned for that, and it will be an early episode.
Oh, I'm excited about
There
that.
you go. But
Well,
yeah, I've been misinterpreted for sure.
I had a similar experience, and it was maybe 10, 12 years ago. I had just started working on my blog, and I met a guy at a party who told me that he worked with my food blog, Broke Ask Gourmet, and he told me that he worked with, I think he worked with brands that might want to sponsor me. And I said, "Oh, that sounds so great. I'd love to talk to you about this." And he said, "Well, let's go out for a drink, and I'll give you a whole presentation." And when I got there and we sat down, I had like a binder in my hand and all my specs and my data points about how many hits I was getting and how many visitors and subscribers I had on my blog. And he had nothing with him, and absolutely treated the entire evening like a date, and then tried to kiss me at the end of it. And I kept thinking, where did I go wrong? And I think that he was just, I think that it got lost in translation a little bit, what was going on. I think he maybe was sending out some signals and I was missing them, or he thought I was trying to connect, but all told, it was very awkward. But
So here's
yeah.
the thing. There are no ground rules for flirting. And there is no manual that you can look up that says when you say this, it comes across as this. Or when you smile in this certain way or cock your head slightly to the side, it means something. But flirting is as old as human beings, is it not?
It absolutely is. And in fact, while there isn't a manual, I did find some pretty interesting guidelines. There is a woman named Jean Smith, and every single article I found on the internet, almost every article about flirting, she seems to have cornered the market on flirting expertise. She calls herself a flirtologist, and she has done a bunch of research. Primarily, I do want to say at the top of this conversation, most of her research, it was in London, New York City, Paris, and Stockholm. And I just want to point out that these are Western cities with big Caucasian populations. And so the guidelines she shares, one thing I kept thinking about was that I'm not sure that this necessarily is true across cultures. So I just want to preface this with her research was through a particular lens. So however, she has written extensively and speaks extensively about this. She has a fun TED Talk, and she has come up with an acronym, and it's called the Hot Ape Flirting Approach. And Hot Ape stands for humor, open body language, touch, attention, proximity, and eye contact. And her
All of
approach
which
is,
sound great.
yeah, so she actually does flirting coaching with individuals and in corporate situations because, flirting is so connected to, as you and I both experienced, the professional world, and she also she doesn't talk too specifically about this, but there are I did find some other articles about appropriateness in the workplace, and whether or not flirting is in fact dead. So I can go
Not
through.
dead.
It's definitely not dead. I think people talk a lot about cancel culture. It's a bit of an aside, but and I don't think we're in cancel culture. I think we're in consequence culture, and I think that people haven't been objecting to flirting; they've been objecting to inappropriate behavior.
There's a pendulum that swings back and forth, and I think we might have some overcorrection going on right now where people are afraid to flirt. That's okay. And when I say people, I mean men.
Yeah, in
In
general, right?
general, I don't think women, right? I don't think women are feeling that same sort of pressure. But I think that that's okay. And the pendulum will come back because it is basically core to human nature.
Absolutely. And I think that that pendulum is how change gets created. Things feel like an overcorrection, and then we very gradually, or sometimes quickly, start rejiggering and finding nuance that makes sense to us. So,
I will say this, though, for salespeople, I think it's different. So I think
yeah.
salespeople use flirting as a professional tool and sometimes inappropriately. And sometimes it's like, I think some people gain an unfair advantage by using
Yeah.
flirting. But I think, it's a dog eat dog world. I don't know. I hate that expression and I'm never going to say that again. Sorry, Moxie. She's in the background.
Well, so I'd love to tell you about the all of the components of the hot ape approach, if you're interested. Um, so,
Please.
uh, so the H is for humor. Laughter produces oxytocin, which Gene Smith calls a liking enhancer, and I personally, I've always liked funny people, and I've liked making people laugh, and so I can definitely vouch for that. I think that makes a lot of sense. The O is for openness. And she says, do you want to know if someone is happy to stay and continue talking to you? Look at where their feet are pointing. If they're pointing directly at you, that's a good sign. If one or both feet are pointed away, you better do some fast talking or let them go. So physical
Oh, I'm going
openness.
to keep an eye on my feet from now on and see if my feet give me away.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wonder if, but maybe sometimes if I'm not sure how I feel about someone, if my feet will be a good indicator for that. Touch is essential to life. Newborn babies die without it. The act of touching and being touched, she says, stimulates the reward center in our brains. Now, of course, you can't just go around touching everybody. And she says, as a general rule, the top part of the arm and the shoulder are safe places to touch. Now, in her TED Talk, she actually recommends, if you're interested in someone and you want to demonstrate your interest, touching them below the shoulder. So like on the upper arm or on the hand. And she says waitresses got a 15% higher tips when they lightly touch their customers' arms while handing them the bill. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm not sure how well I would respond to being touched, especially, all of this stuff was written before the pandemic. So no touching.
I didn't do the research on this, Gabby. You did, but I will say anecdotally, I noticed. I'm just going to throw this in, sort of parenthetically here. When someone compliments me, I think the tip ends up being a little bigger, and I feel like I'm really coming clean by admitting that. But I noticed it the other day. First of all, this business of tipping people when there is absolutely no service. You're at a counter, you order, and then the thing comes up, on your credit card where it asks for a tip, and I think, why am I giving a tip? I stood here, I waited for
I
my
have an
food,
answer to
I
that,
got my
actually.
food. And the woman said to me, I love your top. It's so cute. And I bet she says that to every single person. And once she said that, and we had this nice moment of smiling, I felt like I had to tip her for nothing. So literally, I paid for that compliment on my top.
But I bet you had a little extra spring in your step for the rest of the day. So
Kind of
There's something
did.
there.
But then I felt like an idiot. So I sprang and then I desprung.
Mm,
I'm
you
sorry.
know,
Let's get back to flirting. But that was sort of like flirting.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. And personally, I think when you tip, you're often tipping not just the person who hands you your food, you're tipping the kitchen staff. So there's definitely a lot of good there. Tipping everyone who goes into, they usually pool the tips and split them up. So, you know, it's her flirty compliment to you paid dividends to everyone she works with. So think of it that
Thank you.
way.
I feel much better now.
Okay, good, good. So, yeah, I mean, I'm such a sucker for when a server says to me, tells you a lot about my good girl complex. If a server tells me good choice when I say what I want, if they say, oh, good choice, and then they write it down in their pad, I'm like, oh, yes, I did a good job. I'm a good girl. I'm,
Gold
yeah.
star.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Okay, so we've covered HOT, we've got the hot down. Now we're on to the A for ape. So this is attention. This is pretty obvious to me. People could gauge someone's level of interest by how much attention they were being paid. And so if someone starts to pick up on the fact that you're paying more attention to them, they may conclude that you are in fact flirting with them. And then there's the P, which is personal space. And so she says, once engaged in conversation, if another person is standing nearer to you than necessary, as one London female said, they invade your personal space and you either mind or you don't. So someone getting a little closer to you than necessary. And E is eye contact. So the frequency, how often it happens, the length of time, period of time. So when someone makes eye contact with you, it's pretty obvious. It gives you an indication that they're not thinking about what to make for dinner. They're not thinking about where they have to go next. They're just staying in the moment with you. So those are both her tips for trying to ascertain whether someone's flirting with you. And also if maybe you are a little new to flirting or a little hesitant and you're not really sure how to do it. A lot of these are somewhat nonverbal cues that you can give to another person. So I thought that was really interesting. And it leads me to the thing I have been thinking about a lot. And, like you, I'm married, and so I'm not really looking for lots of opportunities to flirt with new potential romantic partners. But I have
But
found
just
that
some? What do you mean, not many?
I got a short
Just a
rock.
handful.
I have had
Couldn't
a
let
lot
it
of
go.
in the little bit of socializing that I have done, with my vaccinated friends, I have been experiencing a higher level of social anxiety than I used to before. And, it feels like I'm just sort of socially out of shape. And so I was really compelled by some of what I saw about post-pandemic, not that we're post-pandemic, but, sort of now we've been in this for 2 years, what flirting looks like in this era where we have not been, for the most part, in lots of social situations with lots of opportunities to flirt with people. It's a lot of it. I understand is going on online. I think that was true before, but it was also having the opportunity to be translated to the outside world. So,
Some of those hot ape things can't happen online, like the direction of your feet, not relevant. How close you get in terms of the P, the personal space, not relevant, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, also, there are so many things that can confuse online attention. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's genuine interest in getting to know you better. Sometimes it's just what's happening because of the construct of being online. So, essentially, my takeaway, what I found was that once you're out in the world, there are still lots of nonverbal things that work. Things like if you're in a vaccine safe space, you can buy someone bar or buy someone a drink. You can wink. I have never been much of a winker. I don't really know if I'd be real comfortable with that, but
You can bat your eyelashes, right? In some era, that was a thing.
absolutely, absolutely. I think masks have really done a number on our ability. So much of flirting, I think, is your ability to read someone's face. And as kind of an anxious person who's been experiencing a lot of social anxiety, I think that for me, a lot of it comes from not necessarily knowing how someone's feeling when I'm talking to them. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, what have you had? I think of you as so socially capable. Have you
It's an
noticed
act.
any? Well, have you noticed? I've heard from a lot of my friends that they're feeling differently socially these days because they don't spend much time being out in the world. What has your experience of that been?
I feel like I have to defer to the most COVID sensitive or anxious or careful person, right? And this is akin of a friend of mine at the beginning of COVID made this analogy that it's like in Jewish community, you have to defer to the person who has the strictest observance around kashrut, which is
Mm.
kosher, so that you have to just defer to the person for whom it's the strictest. COVID's the same way. So it's like COVID kosher, right? And you take a person, you have to, it takes a minute or two if you're not talking about it to pick up the cues of how COVID sensitive that person is.
Uh-huh.
And it ebbs and flows depending on the variant. So, for instance, we have friends who were eating indoors at restaurants, but now, because of Omicron, are choosing, even though it's not here yet, it probably is here,
Mm.
to not eat indoors any longer. So we defer to them. And so we'll eat out of doors. But I think the single biggest thing in COVID that I missed was hugging. I'm a big
Mm.
hugger. And now I don't feel like I can hug without permission. And, when I see people I haven't seen in a long time, whether we're masked or not masked, it's like, can we hug? Is it okay? And even before they answer, I see the response on their face,
Mm.
even with a mask on. There's a certain body language that says, don't hug me.
Yeah, and it's so tricky because I think what I keep experiencing is beyond even just anxiety about how COVID kosher we're being. I love that hashtag COVID kosher. Um, I'm feeling social anxiety, nervousness about how I'm being perceived and how smooth and comfortable the interaction is going almost beyond how physically safe we're being. And I think it's definitely because it's two things. It's one, it's because I'm trying to sort of suss out how COVID kosher someone wants to be, but also because I've become a bit out of practice. The people I see are the same people, and it's such a comfort to be able to see my little cohort of vaccinated friends. But I think about my daughter who started preschool this year, and it was literally her first social experience ever. She had extremely limited exposure to other people, and it takes a while to learn how to do those even if you're not flirting, do those pick up on those nonverbal cues and sort of follow someone where they're going emotionally in an interaction. And I
That's
sometimes
hard
feel,
without a mask, but with a mask and never having done it before is really hard.
oh, absolutely. But I think sometimes that maybe like I think I'll remember again, but I sometimes feel like I've forgotten a little bit. You know,
So there's this other thing that happens, Gabby, that's really interesting. I find that when I encounter someone, often an old friend or someone I've known very well through the working world, and they are a little bit less COVID sensitive. They've, been triple vaxxed or maybe they've had COVID, and they go, oh, sure, give me a hug. It's like there's some connection that happens, like we're cool. We're not nutty about COVID. We're free. I mean, there's just all this subtext that occurs, I think, in and among flirting or social interaction in this new global pandemic era in which
I
we
think what
find
you're talking
ourselves.
about is mirroring, which we love. It's one of the reasons, babies like it when if you make a sound and and they make a sound and you mimic the sound, is because, they want to do what you're doing. There's this thing where I know you don't have a cat. I'm sure that this comes up with your dog too. But my cat, if I'm in a room with my cat and I've got my laptop out, she wants to be on my laptop. And they actually make little pretend laptops for cats so that you can give your cat a play laptop because they just want to do what you're doing. And so if your cat is always climbing on your laptop, then you give them their own laptop and they'll leave you alone. So all of that is to say, living things like...
I just want to say, as a dog person, cats are strange. I just need to say that. But we can get into that on another episode.
We're doing the opposite
I'm sure there's
mirroring.
something feline. That's an F word.
There you go. So we'll be a quick way to divide our audience. So anyway, but when you talk to someone and you realize they're on the same plane as you, COVID-wise, it feels really good. And I have experienced at times when I was super anxious, and I mean, I'm still incredibly, constantly anxious about COVID. I don't want it to sound like I'm not anxious, but, I feel like in my little world that I've constructed, I have a sort of general sense of basic safety. And when I interact with someone who's on roughly the same plane as I am, it feels really good because it feels like my level of comfort is reflected and my choices are being positively reflected. And so that makes me feel comfortable. Now, graduating that to flirting is a whole other can of worms. But I think that that's a big part of flirting is reflecting to someone else what you're getting from them, and that feels really good to humans.
You know what I want to talk about for a moment is safe flirting versus unsafe flirting. So unsafe flirting, I would say, if you're in a monogamous relationship where it is understood that it's not okay to be with someone else, is flirting still okay? And in my marriage, it absolutely is. We used to joke and say, it doesn't matter where you get your appetite as long as you come home for dinner. So flirting is fine within reason. And there are ways in which it can kind of just tip over that edge and feel like that's a little weird, right? So then it's like you sort of pull it back. But I remember my dad, of blessed memory, who passed away when I was 26. He was, I didn't realize that he was a flirt until I lived with a woman who was a lesbian, and my dad flirted with her like crazy. And I remember thinking, where is this coming from? And where it was coming from was the fact that it was totally 100% safe, and he knew it. And he could do that. It just tickled him that he could flirt with her and she wouldn't be offended and she would flirt back and there would be nothing about it that would be threatening to anyone. And this was a very long time ago, as you might imagine. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is a side of him I've never seen. I've never seen him flirt before. So it's kind of funny. It's like flirting when safe.
Well, on that subject, sort of related, one of my, I have now come to find this a really adorable trait of my husband, and that is that he has truly no clue when he's being flirted with. And regularly, I think he's gotten better now that we've been married for so long, but would regularly get himself into situations where it was clear that someone was interested. And before we were married and he didn't have a ring, I have a memory that stands out was, it was maybe a year or 6 months before we got engaged. And there was a young woman who he had gotten to know. She knew someone he worked with, and maybe she had gone to the same graduate school, and she was asking him for mentoring, and I didn't really think anything of it. And I did notice, though, that she kept texting him, and she lived in our neighborhood in San Francisco at the time, and she kept wanting to connect. And I did think it was a little bit weird, but I wasn't threatened or worried. And then he said, why don't the three of us go out for a drink? It would be so fun for you to meet her. So I get to the bar that we had planned to meet at, and he hadn't arrived yet, and I beat him, and she was there, and I walked up to her and I said, "Hey, I'm Gabby. I'm Evan's girlfriend." And when I tell you that she had no idea that I was going to be there, and she knew I existed, but this woman definitely thought she was going on a date with my boyfriend, and the awkwardness, and he was so clueless. It was so funny. And now that he's got children, especially if he's got our baby on his chest in a carrier, when that man walks around the grocery store or out and about at the farmer's market with Sasha on his chest, oh my God, the amount of attention that he gets and the extent to which he is just, wow, that lady was just so friendly. I have no idea why. It's so funny.
It's like walking around with a puppy, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So single guys, or really anyone, if you're looking for a way to get attention, see if you can get yourself a baby. That's my advice.
And if not a baby, because you can't just borrow one, a puppy.
For sure.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
That's a little bit easier. So one of the things I learned, and I couldn't help myself, I did do a tiny bit of research, was that flirting is really not about the flirter. It really is about the flirtee. That good flirting is about making the other person feel good. And sort of you take the focus off of yourself if you're trying to be a flirt or you're trying to appropriately flirt. And it's about making that other person feel, fill in the blank. Sexy, attractive, like they make good choices, smart, any of it. And that kind of constitutes flirting. And the one other thing I learned was that you shouldn't have a goal. Some people go into a social situation planning to flirt with the goal of getting, for instance, if it's a guy or if it's a woman, getting the other person's phone number, right? Walking away with something that will allow them to follow up and take it to the next level. You shouldn't have a goal. You should just flirt open-endedly and see where it goes.
Well, I think that people can pick up when they're being hunted. I'm not talking about the hunt. I know that that's a whole other thing, but nobody wants to feel like they're being pursued for a very particular outcome right out of the gate. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I love the point about making it about the other person, because I don't know about you, but I have absolutely been cornered at a party by someone who wants to just talk to me nonstop about themselves. And it's, often I think a misguided attempt to connect, but they're forgetting that it should be about developing a rapport at the very minimum and, connecting with the other person, finding out about them.
For people who are really socially awkward now, there are all these like social skills groups and support groups, and you can basically get lessons in this. And one of the key things is ask questions, right? ask the other person questions, and that gets a conversation going.
And
When you
listen
want to fill in
actively.
those awkward silences, ask questions. So what are our takeaways for today, Gabby?
So I think our takeaways are that flirting does not always equal romantic interest, but it can. And your body, your feet, sometimes will give you your body and feet, or the other person's body and feet can give you information that you may not necessarily know about how open or interested they are. Me too does not necessarily mean the end of flirting, but it does mean a little bit of increased awareness. What else you got? What do you think?
I think flirting, but this is my takeaway, is flirting in general makes life more fun, makes life juicier. Anything that can build connection between human beings in a safe way enhances life, and I'm all for it. And I want to encourage people to try flirting with people who are completely unlikely, people who are clearly of a different sexual orientation, or people who are decades older or younger than you. It's fun, it's harmless. It's juicy. And anything
Agreed.
that
And I
makes
think
life a little bit juicier is good.
And I think on that note, the choosing safe people, if you're hesitant or anxious about flirting, or if you're feeling like me and you feel like your social capabilities have atrophied, flirting with safe people who aren't going to misinterpret you is a really good thing, because it the consequences are not going to be bad. There's nothing to be afraid of. And so that might be a good way to help sort of dip your toe in the water.
Great. Thanks so much for listening today. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. We are All the F Words. And on social media, you can find us at allthefwordspod. That would be Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
YouTube. Yes, we're on YouTube now too. And we have a new email address. We mentioned this in our last episode, but we are allthefwordspod@gmail.com. Write to us. We would love to hear your ideas, your suggestions, how you like to flirt, F words that you would love to hear us talk about. We want to hear from you.
See you next time.
Bye.